From CBS News election headquarters in New York, this is Election 74. Here is CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. For some of you, that's good evening again. Polls now have closed or partly closed in 12 states, and the returns already are coming in from this off-year election for the seats of 35 governors, 34 senators, all 435 members of the House of Representatives, some 6,300 members of state legislatures in 45 states. Traditional in non-presidential elections such as this, the party in the White House loses seats. All the signs this year point to no shattering of that tradition. Quite the contrary. In fact, it's the year of the Democrats, it seems. The big question now is how much the voters will hold the Republican candidates responsible for and how much they're going to pay for. Watergate and flat pocketbooks and no jobs in many cases. The issues that dominated the campaign. That we will know before this evening is over. And as this story unfolds, with me here and to share it with you is a team of veteran CBS News correspondents. Mike Wallace watching the East, Roger Mudd covering the South, Dan Rather the Midwest, and Leslie Stahl the West. John Hart's going to be looking for trends, particularly as they affect the House of Representatives. And for his wisdom and insight, Eric Sevareid is on hand again with us tonight. Of course, we're not doing this thing all alone. Looking more and more like he'd come to us from the Mafia for the evening. Of course, we're not doing this thing all alone. There are hundreds of professionals here in election headquarters with us, thousands more spread across the country to collect and correlate, report the story of this election. Periodically through the evening, we'll yield the screen to our affiliates, the stations you're watching, for more detailed reports on those races of special local interest to you, wherever you are. This early in the evening, we're watching two races in particular, the Senate contests in Kentucky and Indiana, for whatever clues they may give us to the overall outcome. And we've already been able to make some determination on how things are going in Kentucky. We'll get that story from Roger Mudd.
Walter, the Republican Party's last statewide office holder, Marlo Cook, tonight has gone down the drain. 6 years ago, the GOP had almost everything in Kentucky, but tonight, Marlo Cook, seeking his second term, has been defeated. The vote shows with about 50% of the vote in, Cook with 53%, Ford with 53%, Cook with 47%. The CBS News estimate shows Wendell Ford, the Democratic governor, will get 56%, Cook 44%. In the Kentucky 4th Congressional District, an interesting race and also an early bellwether. There, the Republican incumbent, Gene Snyder, is leading by only 2 percentage points, and about 2/3 of the precincts are reported. And finally, Walter, in the Florida Senate race, an interesting bellwether there between Democrat Richard Stone, Republican Jack Eckert, and a third-party candidate, Dr. John Grady. That will be an indication of what the GOP will do or not do tonight.
We've got a real cliffhanger in Indiana that may give us some clue as to how the GOP fortunes are in the Midwest. Dan?
Well, Walter, the race in Indiana, we've got a number to watch, but the big one is that Senate race between 46-year-old Democratic incumbent Birch Bayh and the 42-year-old Republican challenger, the Indianapolis mayor, at one time Richard Nixon's favorite mayor, Richard Lugar. Let me show you something. In the counted vote, this is the official tabulated vote out of Indiana. This is the way it looks. Very close, but with Lugar out front. Now, this is the vote that's in and tabulated, Lugar leading 51 to 49%. However, on the basis of our CBS News sample precincts, the CBS News estimate is that Birch Bayh is leading in that race over Lugar by about 52 to 48%. This is what's happening in Indiana, with all of the CBS sample precincts in from Marion County. That's the county in and around Indianapolis, where Mayor Lugar was hoping to come out of that county with a tremendous lead. Bayh is ahead. This is on the basis of our CBS News estimates. However, in the northeast part of the state, which Birch Bayh usually carries by an overwhelming majority, Bayh at the moment is behind. Walter, I think this Indiana Senate race may, as the evening goes along, turn out to be what the sports writers call a Frank Merriwell finish.
Well, in addition to Indiana and Kentucky, there are 6 other Senate races and 6 gubernatorial races that we're keeping a close watch on tonight. Of course, we're keeping a close watch on all of them, but these are the ones that are so close that we can't see an early trend at all. And those involve the Senate races in Alaska, Nevada, Kansas, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and Utah. Republicans now hold 4 of those Senate seats, and governor seats in Kansas, Maine, South Carolina, Arizona, Michigan, and Wyoming, which are evenly split between Democrats and Republicans at the moment. One Democratic senator we may safely assume has been elected is Louisiana's Russell Long. We can safely assume that because he has no opposition. And 2 more Democratic senators, James Allen of Alabama and Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, are virtually as well off. They have no major party opposition, though we don't feel we can yet put them up on the board as winners. Also, without any significant opposition, are 59 House Democrats and 1 Republican. Only 1 Republican's home free. He's Charles Whalen of Ohio. We also, of course, have cameras and correspondence with the candidates at their campaign headquarters in various parts of the country, although obviously not with those candidates we've just been talking about who don't have significant races. One of our veteran men in the field is Nelson Benton. He's at Senator Bayh's headquarters in a storefront on North Meridian Street in Indianapolis. Nelson, come in.
Walter, to use Dan Rather's Frank Merriwell analogy, has become the Yale Bowl today, and the indications are that perhaps Indianans are voting more than the predicted 58% in an overcast, chilly day. There are a couple of hundred people or better gathered at Birch Bayh's headquarters, and his camp is confidently optimistic that he will win a 3rd term in the United States Senate. Indianapolis Mayor Richard Lugar is somewhat less busy. Lugar is the underdog. His last poll, taken 10 days ago, indicated a dead heat. Neither man has ever lost an election. There is a 3rd-party candidate in Indiana, the American Party's Don Lee. He's expected to get perhaps at most 3% of the total vote and not expected to be a factor. Walter?
Maybe he's not expected to be a factor, but 3%, the way this thing is breaking down now, could be a factor unless those 3% are evenly split between the 2 other candidates.
That's true, Walter. Let me explain that a little bit. Mr. Lee is a and there's some feeling that although he might get some Republican votes, he might also, by virtue of the fact that he's a UAW man, pick up some of the UAW votes that would normally go to Birch Bayh. I guess we have to just wait and see, Walter.
So you're in the hot spot for a while tonight anyway, and we'll be coming back to you probably frequently. As usual on election night, we'll be reporting 2 types of results. One, as you already seen, the tabulated vote. The other is what we call, as you already also seen, the CBS News estimate. Now, this estimate is derived from the returns of carefully selected precincts which are fed into our computers throughout the evening. These precincts enabled us to estimate very accurately who's likely to win and by what kind of a margin. If a race is very close, the estimate may take a while. If it's not, why, the estimate could come very early with just a few precincts. This year, for the first time, we have no huge walls around here surrounding us of tote boards in our election headquarters. They've been replaced by automated, computer-driven display systems, which, if they all work, instantly put the information on the television screen. For me, that's something of a minor problem. Instead of looking up all evening, I've got to look down at the TV screens, but I think I can suffer it somehow or other. Our coverage of Election 74 will resume in a minute. Eric Sevareid has some thoughts on voter attitudes in this first national election since the full revelations of the political abuses of the Watergate scandal. Eric?
Well, Walter, I was thinking a moment about this business of apathy and turnout. We always get some early reports of heavy turnout, no matter what the weather's like. But there's no reason at all to believe that this 10-year slide in the average turnout of eligible voters in this country is going to be interrupted by this election. For one thing, you've got 12 million more voters between the ages of 18 and 21 than we had 4 years ago in the last off-year election. And they don't vote in great numbers, so they add to that stay-home vote very considerably. So the national average, I think, will be right far down. But also, of course, because no president running, and because the issues are so blurred. There's nothing inflammatory this time, really inflammatory, like busing or crime and law and order, foreign war, and so on. Inflation is smoldering. It's an underground kind of a peat fire, but it's not in flames yet. So very little of the old, fine, careless pleasures of demagoguery that we had in 1970, for example, with Mr. Agnew barnstorming the country with his marvelous active adjectives. Everybody gets the impression, and I do too, that people are not looking for charisma in candidates. They're looking for character, to use the old-fashioned word, reputation, not the word image. The electorate is Diogenes with a lantern stumbling through the fog looking for an honest man. Of course, politicians and politics in general are low-rated now by nearly everybody, like all other institutions in this country practically. And yet it has to be pointed out that among the people heavily tainted by Watergate and the associated scandals from it, very few were real, true professional politicians. Mr. Nixon, Mr. Connally, Mr. Agnew, Reineke in California. Practically all the others were lawyers, businessmen, advertising people, not politicians at all. But it's perfectly clear that people aren't worrying very much about the veto-proof Congress that President Ford has warned about. You never get a veto-proof Congress actually anyway. Or about the survival of the two-party system. We're going to go back to what essentially has been a one-and-a-half-party system in any case. They don't seem to be bitter. They're rather resentful, rather sullen. They're expectant. But there's no real cutting edge here to their desire. They are saying to a candidate, I'm not telling you to go do this, I'm telling you to go do something. I think that's about it. Back to you, Walter.
Thank you, Eric. On that Indiana race, let's take another quick look at it because it is so close. In the senatorial race in Indiana, Richard Lugar, the Republican challenger, now has 219,000 votes, and by 219,000 votes, they're just splitting the vote almost evenly with just a quarter of the vote count at 26%. Our CBS News estimate still is that By, on the basis of our sample precincts, has the lead actually at 52 to 48%. And should he hold it, will safely hold on to that Democratic seat in the Senate of the United States. Mike Wallace, I know that most of your eastern states don't close their polls for another 45 minutes or so now, but what are we going to be looking for when the returns do start coming in on us?
Well, Walter, there are 9 races for governor and 6 for the Senate in the East tonight, and when it's over, we are told the East is going to look a good deal more like Democratic territory. Let's begin with the New York governor's race. The Rockefeller years apparently are coming to an end, 16 years of his money and influence on politics in this state. Hugh Carey, a Democrat congressman from Brooklyn who wasn't even known to one New Yorker in 20 a year ago, dyed his hair, lost 20 pounds, and went on television. And apparently he's going to defeat Rockefeller's hand-picked successor, Governor Malcolm Wilson. To do it, Carey has managed to persuade both organization and reform Democrats to support him in New York, and that hasn't been done in this state in a long, long time. The polls don't close in New York for about 2 hours. Up in Connecticut, a Democrat will apparently take over the State House vacated by Republican Tom Meskill. Ella Grasso expected to win over her fellow congressperson Robert Steele because she is better known, she is a consumer advocate, and perhaps most of all, Democrats out-register Republicans in Connecticut now by about 150,000. There could be a surprise up in Massachusetts. Massachusetts was supposed to turn Democratic this year, but the polls within the last 2 or 3 days say it's going to be a good deal closer than expected. Republican Francis Sargent has been governor up there for 6 years. He runs a state where the unemployment rate is at least 2 points higher than the national average. He faces a tough, bright, well-organized young Reform Democrat named Michael Dukakis. Surprisingly, this race looks too close to call right now, ahead of time. We should begin to have some results from Massachusetts in about an hour. In the Senate, most attention in the East focuses on that bitter name-calling battle between Jacob Javits and Ramsey Clark. Clark has said that integrity in politics is the central issue of our time, and he has tried to paint Javits as a trimmer, an opportunist, a tool of the special interests. Javits has called Clark an ineffectual do-gooder. It begins to look, though, as though Jacob Javits will be returning to Washington for a 4th term. 2 incumbent, liberal, anti-Nixon Republican senators, Schweiker of Pennsylvania, Mathias of Maryland, are apparently going to be reelected, both supported by Labor, both amply financed. In the House in the East, Democrats could pick up some strength. 2 seats to watch involve staunch defenders of Richard Nixon on the Judiciary Committee. You'll remember them, Charles Sandman especially, and Joseph Maraziti of New Jersey, both of them in tough races. And finally, in that same state, New Jersey, a referendum on legalized casino gambling. If the voters okay it, Walter, Atlantic City could wind up Las Vegas East.
Mike, before we leave the East, you want to take a look at your New Hampshire returns up there. I find it somewhat interesting. 2% of the vote is in so far, but look at there. Mildred Thompson, the incumbent Republican governor, has a 62% lead over his Democratic opponent, but in the Senate race, the Democratic challenger for that seat being left open by the retirement Norris Cotton is running ahead of Louis Wyman, the Republican. So couldn't you read into that 2% of the vote that very possibly the Democrats may pick up a surprise seat in New Hampshire?
If they pick up a seat in New Hampshire, that will be a big surprise. What has happened there, of course, is the fact that Lou Wyman, who's a conservative congressman, been in office for about 6 terms down in Washington, got tagged a little bit by Watergate. It seems that he introduced Ruth Farkas to somebody on the re-election committee, I believe Maurice Stans. Ms. Farkas wound up giving $300,000 to the Richard Nixon campaign in 1972, and she wound up as an ambassador to Luxembourg. Eventually, Leon Jaworski said that Wyman did nothing illegal, but it is possible up there that Lou Wyman is suffering on that account. It does seem to be, the figures seem to be saying that for the moment anyway, Walter.
And in Florida, our CBS News estimate is that Governor Ruben Askew has, as expected, easily won re-election as the governor of Florida, turning back the bid of Republican Jerry Thomas. CBS News coverage of Election 74 continues after this message.
Only Mighty Dog from Carnation is pure beef. All leading canned dog foods contain some byproducts, but Mighty Dog is pure beef, no byproducts. No wonder it smells good and tastes better than any leading canned dog food. It's fully nourishing with single-serving cans that end leftovers. Mighty Dog, pure beef, no byproducts.
Well, great apartment. Nice of Al to let me use it while he's gone. Hey, there's the coffee pot. Guess I'll have to drink it black. What's this? Coffee Mate non-dairy creamer. Carnation makes it. Worth a try. 11 calories and a level teaspoon. Well, it sure makes the coffee taste good. I'm going to remember Coffee Mate.
Mike Wallace told us about the Las Vegas East vote in New Jersey for whether to have casino gambling or not, so I suppose that logically leads us back to the real Las Vegas, the whole West, and Leslie Stahl for a report on the major contests out there. Leslie?
Walter, the polls obviously are still opened in the West, but there are some very exciting and very significant races in that part of the country. In fact, some that could introduce new faces to the national political scene. The West has often been the political trendsetter in the country. Remember, it was that region that thrust the conservative politics of Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, and even Richard Nixon into national prominence. But tonight, the West seems to be moving toward a moderate and even liberal position. Take California, for example, the largest state in the country. Governor Reagan is retiring. And in the race to succeed him, moderate Republican Houston Flournoy has been picking up in the polls there. But the liberal Democrat, Jerry Brown, is still ahead as of the last poll we saw. 36-year-old Brown, son of the former Governor Pat Brown, campaigned more against Ronald Reagan's Platt programs his 8 years in office than he did against Flournoy. Meanwhile, the 45-year-old Flournoy campaigned saying that Brown was too inexperienced to be governor. The polls close in California at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. In Colorado, the race to watch there is for the Senate, where 36-year-old Gary Hart, who ran George McGovern's campaign in '72, is seriously challenging the conservative incumbent Republican Senator Peter Dominick. The polls out there have consistently shown Hart in the lead. For governor in Colorado, there's the staunch environmentalist, the Democrat Richard Lamb, who is favored over the Republican incumbent John Vanderhoof. The issue in Colorado, more than anywhere else in the country, is the environment. And the Colorado polls close tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. There are some tight races in both Utah and Nevada, where there are strong liberal versus conservative confrontations. and persons of Spanish-American heritage have good chances to win races for governor in both Arizona and New Mexico. Hawaii may have the country's first governor of Japanese ancestry, and there could be an Eskimo from Alaska in the House of Representatives. The West has its share of women candidates, too. A woman is running for Senate from Oregon and for governor in Nevada. The polls in the West are still open, but within a couple of hours, we should have an idea of who has won the West. Walter?
In Alabama, we can now say with certainty that Governor George Wallace has been reelected. There really wasn't much doubt about that all along. His Republican opposition was just barely in the token category. Now, with the first returns in, it is confirmed Governor Wallace will be returned to the State House in Montgomery and prepare, presumably, for his role in national politics in 1976. In that Indiana race that we've been watching very closely, very close race, Birch Bayh, the incumbent Democrat, has moved into the lead now on the basis of the tabulated vote for the first time. 30% of the vote in, and as you see there, Bayh has 51% now to Indianapolis Mayor Lugar's 49%. Our CBS News estimate now has strengthened Bayh's lead on the basis of our sample precincts to 53% to 47% for Lugar, and if that continues, Birch Bayh will be the winner in Indiana. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, where our CBS News estimate now says that Birch Bayh has won re-election as the senator from Indiana in a very close race with the mayor of Indianapolis, Richard Lugar, a favorite young possibility on the Republican side. We believe that when all the votes are counted, Bayh will have 53% of the vote and Lugar 47%. The actual tabulated vote at this point, with just about a third of the vote in, Bayh has 51% and Lugar 49%. Also in the state of Illinois, Adlai Stevenson III has been reelected according to our CBS News sample precincts by almost a 2-to-1 margin over his Republican opponent, George Burdett. The actual tabulated vote in Illinois at this point, there's not even 1% of the vote counted yet, shows a much more even race than we know the final result will be from the basis of our sample precincts. Now let's take a quick rundown through the regions where votes have come in on the votes on the states where we do have some tabulated votes so far. First, Mike Wallace in the East. Mike?
Walter, at this point, only the most scattered returns in the East, but in New Hampshire, a possible, repeat possible, Democratic upset that you pointed out earlier. Let's take a look. In the Senate race, with 3% of that vote now counted in New Hampshire, Congressman Lou Wyman is running behind former State Insurance Commissioner John Durkin, the Democrat, by 54 to 46%. And at the same time, Republican Governor Meldrum Thompson is leading his Democratic opponent, Richard Leonard, in that state, 62% to 38%. So conceivably, there is an unexpected Democratic seat in the Senate in New Hampshire. A big defeat, if it should come, to Lou Wyman, who's been in the Congress for 6 terms. Walter?
Let's take a look at the South now. Roger Mudd.
In Florida, we've got a very close race in the Senate contest, an open seat to succeed the retiring Republican Edward Gurney, and as expected, the third-party candidate, Dr. John Grady, pulling in about 16% of the vote, has caused Democrat Richard Stone and Republican Jack Eckert to run about dead even. In Alabama, in the Senate, James Allen has been elected to his 2nd term. In the Alabama gubernatorial race, George Wallace has been elected to his 3rd term. In the Georgia governor's race, George Busby, majority leader in the state legislature, elected governor. And in the Georgia Senate race, Herman Talmadge elected to his 4th term. Walter?
You got a close race going, or not a close race, but you've got, well, it's pretty close, isn't it, in Florida on the for the Senate seat in Florida, haven't you?
That's the 3-way race between Eckert, Stone, and John Grady. That will not be decided for a while because we can't tell yet what Dr. Grady is going to do. If he holds at 16%, as the indications are, it will be quite a while before we can get a break on that.
Dan Rather, how about the Midwest?
Walter, here's what we're looking for in this next 10 to 15 minute period. Since, by the CBS News estimate, Birchby has been reelected in Indiana, Adlai Stevenson in Illinois. Here's now what we're looking for. Gilligan Rhodes in what is expected to be a tight race for governor in Ohio. How big will astronaut John Glenn's margin turn out to be in that Ohio Senate race? Dole versus Roy in the tight Kansas Senate race. Dole, the Republican incumbent, trying to hold on. Milton Young, another Republican incumbent, trying to beat back the challenge from Democrat William Guy in North Dakota. Let me show you something in Indiana, if I may, with a member of the House Judiciary Committee. This is a House seat in Indiana. That's the By-Lugar race, the official tabulated vote. What I'd like to see in Indiana is that House race, because David Dennis, a 62-year-old member of the House Judiciary Committee, on the basis of very early returns, Walter, is trailing his Democratic challenger. Now, one reason we wanted to mention this, Walter, was simply to point out to our viewers that as the evening goes along, we're going to keep a very close eye on House races in general, but particularly those House members who were members of the Judiciary Committee. In this case, David Dennis is trailing in Indiana.
We're also going to be keeping an eye on those districts where there were special elections over this last year. Since the horror of Watergate came fully upon the populace and Democrats swept most of those special elections. We want to see how they're doing in the general election this year, and we will find that out as well. We'll also be watching the record number of races where women are involved, for the House of Representatives particularly, also for the Senate and governorships, and where blacks are involved, a record number of those as well. Our coverage of Election 74 will continue shortly. So far tonight, the 6 Senate seats have been decided, all in favor of the Democrats. The Republicans have taken one of those seats, or the Democrats have taken one of those seats from the Republicans. In the other 5 cases, incumbents have been reelected. Those races are in Kentucky, Louisiana, Alabama, Indiana, Georgia, and Illinois. There have been 3 gubernatorial races decided so far in Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, with the Democrats holding on to all of those state houses. And now another Senate race has been decided according to our CBS News estimate. Senator Ernest Hollings has been reelected in South Carolina by better than a 2-to-1 margin over Mrs. Winifred Bush, who was his opponent in the South Carolina senatorial race. That makes 7 races decided so far this evening. Let's take a rundown of our computer readout screens here on some of the vote that has been tabulated so far across the country. In the East, for instance, in Maine, we see in the gubernatorial race in Maine, with about 1% of the vote counted, there James Irwin, the Republican candidate, has 44% of the vote, and Charles Mitchell, George Mitchell rather, the Democratic candidate, 27% of the vote. James Longley, the independent, is running a very strong race. As Mike Wallace reported to you earlier, 29% of the vote. In New Hampshire, Mike reported those races to you just a moment ago. Louis Wyman is running behind in his race for the Senate against John Durkin, the Democrat, 54 to 46%. And in the New Hampshire gubernatorial race, Richard Leonard is running behind incumbent Republican Meldrum Thompson, some 38 to 62%. In Vermont, there are some returns in now. 4% of the vote is in Vermont. And in the Senate race in Vermont, Patrick Leahy is running behind the Republican Richard Mallory, 43 to 57%. In the gubernatorial race, Walter Kennedy, the Republican challenger, is 46% to the incumbent Governor Thomas Salmons, 54%. In the Middle West, in Illinois, as reported, Adlai Stevenson has won there to return to the Senate. In Indiana, Birchby will be returned by the voters of that state. In Michigan, in the gubernatorial race, that is supposed to be a very close one there. There isn't 1% of the vote counted in Michigan yet, but those votes that have counted show Sander Levin, the Democratic challenger, with 123,000 to 76,000 for the incumbent, Mr. Milliken, and his percentage is 62 to 38%. That's with less than 1% of the vote counted, so it's not very meaningful as yet. In Missouri, less than 1% of the vote counted also, but there in the senatorial race, Tom Eagleton is running behind Tom Curtis, 53 to 47% for Tom Curtis, the former congressman who Tom Eagleton, the one-time very brief vice presidential candidate, defeated just 6 years ago. In Nebraska, there the incumbent governor, with less than 1% of the vote counted, has jumped into an early lead. J.J. Exxon, the Democrat, over his opposition, Richard Marvell. In the South, Running down the board on the South so far, we have heard calls on the CBS News estimates from Roger Mudd that James Allen has won his Senate seat in Alabama, and George Wallace won his governorship in Alabama without any trouble at all. There are early returns in from Florida, about 4% of the vote counted, and there in that Senate race, Jack Eckert, the Republican, has 23,000 votes to Richard Stone's 22,000, a 42 to 40% lead with the third-party candidate, the American Independent Party, George Wallace, holding an 18% balance of power vote so far, with 4% counted in Florida. In the Florida gubernatorial race, Reuben Askew has been reelected with very little trouble at all. The same thing applies to Herman Talmadge in the Senate in Georgia, and to George Busbee, the gubernatorial candidate in Georgia, who also has won. And in Kentucky, the Democrats having taken that Senate seat from the Republicans, Wendell Ford, the governor, defeating incumbent Marlow Cook. In North Carolina, the race at this point in North Carolina looks like this. You see the Republican and, well, there really aren't very many returns there yet at all, are there, from North Carolina, but the Democrat has jumped into an early lead. Robert Morgan, as expected, 62% to 38% for the Republican candidate. In the South Carolina Senate race, Ernest Hollings has won there. And in the South Carolina gubernatorial race, with 2% of the vote counted, it's rather interesting at this point. We see James Edwards with 52% of the vote. He's the Republican candidate, and it was expected that he might indeed sweep to a victory there. As Roger Mudd told you earlier, he's got an early lead with 2% of the vote counted over William Jennings Bryan Dorn, the Democratic candidate. In the Tennessee gubernatorial race, Lamar Alexander and Ray Blanton, and there's not 1% of the vote counted in Tennessee yet, but Alexander has moved into a slight, rather substantial lead, but not very many votes counted as yet. And nothing in from the West, as we know. Those polls still have some time before they close. John Hart is at our trend desk and has some thoughts now on the power of incumbency in any election. John?
Walter, there is an early trend among the winners that we've estimated tonight, and that is, as you indicated, a trend toward incumbents. That's not surprising. Incumbents have history on their side. In the last two elections of the House, 97% of all incumbents won re-election to their old seats. This year they have a number of other things going for them, a number of dollars exactly. Special interest groups have contributed 80% of their money to incumbents, and in the Senate, the average incumbent running for office raised twice as much money as his challenger. In fact, the only Senate incumbent who raised less money than his opponent, Marlow Cook, has lost. In addition, Common Cause estimates that the average member has used at least $50,000 worth of free mailing privileges this year prior to this election, making themselves and their views known to the folks at home. All of these are tremendous advantages of the incumbent over the challengers. And later on tonight, Walter, we'll be seeing which kind of incumbent does better, Democratic or Republican.
Incumbency also counts in the control of those state houses, John. Who is the governor of a state? He has a lot of power. He has power to help select delegates to his party's national convention, and then he has power of all of the state employees to be used in election efforts and to raise money. And that's why the control of these governorships is so important as the two parties head in the 1976 presidential campaign. It will be a year in which the Democrats will control most of the state houses in the country. They already do, and they're not likely to lose many. In fact, they're likely to gain 5 or 6 tonight. It could put them in control, possibly, of the 10 biggest states in the country with the biggest electoral vote, the greatest population, and that would give them a big leg up in the 1976 presidential races, something we're going to be watching very closely as this night goes on. Our coverage of Election 74 will continue shortly. One of the races that the polls all indicated would safely go into the Democratic hands tonight is that in Ohio's senatorial race, where the first man to orbit the Earth, the first American, John Glenn, is expected to go to Washington as a senator from that state. And Bruce Morton is at the John Glenn headquarters at the Holiday Inn in Columbus, Ohio. Bruce?
Walter, absolutely nothing set that prediction. I don't want to say that they're confident here, but you can probably hear the band playing. And if the camera will move over a little bit, you can see a large cake. It represents the capital of the United States in white and blue icing. And it's here because John Glenn's friends in Columbus all feel that that's where he's going. The polls and the prophets say he may get as much as 65 to 70% of the vote. Less certain is the status of the other statewide office seeker here, the incumbent Democratic Governor John Gilligan. He's in a much tighter race with Republican James Rhodes. People here at Glenn headquarters, Walter, say the turnout has been heavy. On balance, they think, light or heavy, their man is home safe. Walter?
Thank you, Bruce. When is your man expected down there at his headquarters, John Glenn? Is he going to wait till all the returns are in or what?
Well, he said that he either until his Republican opponent Ralph Peart, the mayor of Cleveland, had conceded, or until the returns were mathematically certain one way or the other. We have some hopes that we may be able to see him a little before that.
No returns at all in from Ohio yet, of course.
Closed here at 7:30 Eastern Time, which is what, just over 15 minutes ago.
Right. Okay, Bruce, we'll be coming back to you a little later on. And let's go now to the south. Take a look at more detailedly at the races there with Roger Mudd.
Walter, in Florida, the third-party candidacy of Dr. John Grady, the American Party candidate, a member of the National Board of Directors of the John Birch Society, has caused the Florida Senate race to go into almost a dead heat. Dr. Grady is pulling votes not only from the Panhandle, the northern and western part of Florida, considered to be more conservative, but also he's pulling votes from all over the state. And that means that Grady's presence on the ballot is damaging Richard Stone, who is the Democrat and needed not only his vote from South Florida, but also had to cut into Jack Eckert's strength in the central, more conservative areas of the state. So with the returns early from Florida, there is no trend there. That will be one we'll have to watch for sometime this evening. In the South Carolina governor's race, a confused, sometimes embittered Democratic Party had to take its substitute nominee, William Bryan Jennings Dorn, and try to scramble at the last minute because the primary winner, Charles Ravenel, was disqualified, and the Republican candidate, John Edwards, state senator, is now leading with a very narrow margin. In the Kentucky Senate race, the victor there is the Democratic Governor Wendell Ford. The loser, Marlow Cook. Governor Ford did well all over Kentucky. He neutralized Marlow Cook's strength in Jefferson County around Louisville and did very well in the other cities of the state. And in the Kentucky 4th Congressional District, that early bellwether of Republican fortunes tonight, the Republican incumbent, Gene Snyder, is leading by about 51% over the Democrat Kyle Hubbard. 2 years ago, Mr. Snyder was re-elected by 74%. Walter?
We were talking about turnout a little while ago. It has been heavier across much of the United States than had been anticipated. That's the word from the the tabulated vote collection center, and also from reports from state capitals. It's been heavier than expected in Oregon and Kansas, Michigan, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Arkansas, Vermont, all reported higher than expected. California and Connecticut seem to be lower. New York seems to be a little bit lower. In the Midwest, Dan, that's a place where in the House races we can spot any possible Democratic sweep, I gather. Have you got any guidance yet on those races?
Exactly, Walter. We do have some guidance, and here's the thing to keep in mind, that the Midwest is the only section of the country that still has more Republican House members than it has Democratic House members. Now, if this is to be any kind of earth slide for the Democrats tonight, first of all, you'll be able to tell it in the House races. Secondly, you'll be able to tell it first, I think, in the Midwest. Now, on the basis of our CBS News estimate, we've already reported that Senator Birch Bayh, the Democratic incumbent, is not only winning, but probably winning pretty big in Indiana. And take a look at those Indiana House races. No fewer than 4 Republican incumbents are trailing now in Indiana. Indiana, a conservative, basically Republican state. They break down 4 Democrats, 7 Republicans in the House in Indiana going into tonight's election. Right now, 4 of the Republicans are trailing: Landgrebe, Zion, Hudnut, Dennis. Dennis and Landgrebe were among the last-ditch Nixon supporters in the House of Representatives. So, Walter, I think we'll be able to tell within the next hour as to how big it's going to be in terms of the House races in the Midwest.
One of the important factors, of course, will not be just the party designation, but whether the candidates and those elected are more liberal or conservative than the people they replace in the Congress, and indications are that there will be a small move toward the liberal side on both the House and the Senate when all the votes have been counted tonight. And now our CBS News estimate is that on the basis of early reports from our sample precincts that John Glenn, the astronaut, is a landslide winner in the Ohio Senate race, that he will win with over 70% of the vote when all the votes are tabulated there. And in North Carolina, Robert Morgan, according to our CBS News estimate, has been elected to the Senate there. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters. Good evening again from our CBS News Election Headquarters, where we've been following the vote tabulation across the country so far tonight. The turnout today was larger than expected in many states, a little smaller than expected in some others. Smaller in California, Connecticut, and New York, larger in a lot of other states, however. The weather was rather poor in the eastern part of the United States, not too good in the Midwest, but not bad, and very nice out in the plain states, the West Coast, and in the Southwest. So far this evening, 9 Senate races have been decided, and the Democrats have taken all of those. There are still 25 of the 34 races to be decided yet this evening, and a lot of those will be coming in the next half hour or hour as polls close. That in those Senate returns so far, the Democrats have gained 1 seat in the 94th Congress. That was in Kentucky, where Governor Wendell Ford defeated incumbent Republican Senator Marlo Cook. The present Senate has 42 Republicans and 58 Democrats. With that one gain, the Democrats would have 59 if they hold on of all of their own seats. In the gubernatorial races, 3 have been decided so far in the South: Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. 32 of those 35 races yet to be decided. In the House, there aren't a lot of elections decided yet. 11 Republicans and 63 Democrats. 59 of those Democrats and 1 of the Republicans had no opposition, so we haven't had a lot of returns from the House of Representatives as yet. Now let's go to Dan Rather and a recap of how things are going in the Middle West, particularly that race in Ohio, which we decided just before we left the air 7 or 8 minutes ago.
Walter, as you reported by our CBS News estimates, John Glenn is going to win overwhelmingly in Ohio, but the governor's race in Ohio, Gilligan versus Rhodes, may turn out to be a little closer, and I'll tell you in just a moment, but I think it might be worth remembering that ex-Senator Young in Ohio said of John Glenn, quote, John Glenn never landed on the moon, John Glenn never even went around the moon. All John Glenn ever did was go around the earth in a semi-crouched position. Well, now what John Glenn has done in addition to that is not only win, but win in wipeout fashion. It may very well be that John Glenn will wind up to win by the largest margin in Ohio history, and if he does, you can bet the ranch that he is going to be at least a vice presidential potential on the Democratic ticket for 1976. Glenn did very well in working class neighborhoods, winning by margins 2-1 and better. In Cincinnati and Columbus, Glenn ran nearly 25% better than Democrats usually do in those areas. However, based on early returns, the Republican gubernatorial candidate in Ohio, James Rhodes, the former governor, is making a strong showing, and that race could turn out to be close against the incumbent Democrat, John Gilligan. Walter, will simply have to wait and see.
Dan, you know, there's an interesting thing about that race out there, which I know you know, but the esoteric nature of politics, the subtleties of the great game of politics are being played in that whole Ohio race. There's no love lost, we know, between John Glenn's campaign and that of Gilligan's. Gilligan wanted Glenn to run as lieutenant governor, and Glenn didn't want to do that, and that kind of caused some friction. And then Gilligan named Howard Metzenbaum to the seat vacated by Saxby, the Republican, who went on to be Attorney General, and that didn't please Glenn at all. And then Gilligan supported Metzenbaum in the primary. Glenn had to knock Metzenbaum off. Well, the problem with that thing is that now Gilligan sees himself being overshadowed by Glenn, and there were reports afoot that the Gilligan people were saying that Glenn would win by at least 1 million votes. hoping that if he didn't win by 1 million votes, it would look like he didn't do as well as expected and would kind of take some of the shine off of his victory.
Exactly. Walter, one other point. I know you want to move on to something else, but...
Matter of fact, we're going to move on to John Glenn himself.
Well, this Glenn race, keep in mind as he talks there in Ohio, I know he's walking into the room, it may mean trouble for at least Dan Devine, the Republican congressman around Columbus. He could be wiped out with this very strong Glenn showing.
Right. And there we can see on our screen from Columbus, Ohio, the Holiday Inn headquarters of John Glenn. John Glenn. Hello, John, and hello, Bruce Morton is with you.
Walter, how are you? Glad to talk to you again.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Colonel Glenn, I guess we might start by saying project you as a winner. I think everybody projects you as a winner. You're here looking like a winner. What did it? Was this, among other things, a good year for somebody who was well-known and popular and not a politician?
Well, with all due respect to the projections, I'm waiting for the final vote to come in. That's the only one that really counts, but things look pretty good, of course, and I don't know. About a year ago, we determined we would just go directly to the people in Ohio when we were having some difficulties on who was going to run for what office that Walter was referring to a few moments ago there. And so we did exactly that. We went to the people, and in the primary, that came through, and we never really let up after the primary. We just continued right on running all through the year. And so I think it's paid off. And the people in Ohio this time, turning out apparently in record numbers this year, have been... They haven't been apathetic when we've been with them. They've been interested in issues and talking about the concerns and inflation and cost of living and not just a cosmetic type interest, not just a little interest, but a real in-depth discussion of these things. And we've participated in that just back and forth across Ohio all year. And so I think that's what has done it for us.
Colonel Glenn, obviously anybody who wins big in Ohio is a factor in national politics. You are going to be mentioned as a possible vice president, a possible president. How do you feel about that?
We haven't tried to project anything like that, obviously. I think it indicates the lack of confidence that so many people have in anything in Washington or on the East Coast almost these days. Any candidate that wins west of the Potomac or west of the Hudson River is suddenly talked about as being national ticket material. I win a primary, I'm talked about. Dale Bumpers wins in Arkansas. He's talked about as national ticket. Pat Brown wins in California. He's mentioned national ticket material. I think it just indicates that some of the lack of confidence people have had in the national government and anyone connected with Washington this past year or so.
You're not ready to do a Sherman about this, though, and say never, never, never.
No, all I've been saying is that I want to go to Washington and be the best senator Ohio has ever sent to Washington. I want to work on that.
But you're not ruling out other things.
I want to go to Washington and be the best senator Ohio sent to Washington.
John?
What a...
Walter?
Excuse me, Bruce. I didn't want to... go ahead, Bruce. I'll get my question.
No, I just... you were talking, Walter, about the state... And there is some Gilligan-Glenn rivalry, assuming that we're right and you win. Can you now assume some greater share of control of the state party mechanism that's been entirely the governor's?
We haven't been looking toward any great control. I do think that I represent a lot of people in Ohio, and assuming this goes through tonight and the vote does come through as projected, and I do have a big vote, I look at that as a trust to represent all those people in party affairs as well as in Washington. And so I would certainly expect my voice to be heard in party affairs here. But as far as having some big battle to take over party control, that's been a fictitious confrontation that people have made up here someplace. I haven't been trying that. We've been trying through all this campaign, support as many people as we could, trying to get into office, good people that we were willing to endorse and get behind. We worked very hard for this whole ticket, and we're glad to see it coming through.
Walter? John?
Yes, go ahead, Walter.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you've certainly ventilated the issues in your campaign out there, but I wonder if the people around the United States know very much about where you stand. We can't tick off all the issues here, but where would you place yourself in the political spectrum from left to right?
Constructive. Walter, I dislike labels very, very much. If anyone can define liberal and conservative, then I'll take that definition and say where I stand within that. But, you know, if we are at a time of balanced budget, no war, surplus money, you might tend to vote for programs that would be considered considerably liberal. At other times, such as we're in now, where you might want to not vote for such programs as that, it would be considered conservative. But each instance, it would be a conservative. I mean, it would be a constructive stance. And so I really don't like this thing of the labels of liberal and conservative. I'll just have to go on my record if this all comes through successfully tonight and let people start judging on their own where I stand.
We know that you're a Kennedy family. Would you call yourself a Kennedy Democrat?
Oh, I don't call myself any Democrat. I'm myself. I don't align myself with anyone else's record, much as I may admire them or admire the things that they've done. But I'll run on my own record here and hope to be giving a very constructive stewardship if tonight comes through okay.
Give my best regards to Mrs. Glenn.
Thank you. She's upstairs here, and I'm sure she'll be on with me after a while.
I remember rooting you on from Cape Kennedy, or then Cape Canaveral, 11 years ago, wasn't it?
Long ways. A mutual friend of ours is here tonight, Henry Landworth, who you know very well, and so I'm sure he'd want to be remembered to you too, Walter.
Tell Henry hello for me.
Yeah, I sure will. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, John Glenn and Bruce Morton out in Columbus. Let's take a look at the southern states now with Roger Mudd. Roger?
Walter, one of the new Democratic senators from the South who will be coming to Washington this January is the governor of Kentucky, Democrat Wendell Ford. He's 50 years old, and tonight Ford spoke with Bob Johnson of WHAS in Louisville, Kentucky.
Watergate was the overriding issue in the campaign. Bob, as you know, I said when I announced I would not run against my opponent because of Watergate, I said he did not have to take a part in Watergate. But Mr. Coy said that he was the third strongest supporter of the Nixon administration in the United States Senate, and I never did refute that. I kept reminding the people of that, and I think the Nixonomics that we referred to is one of the things that was uppermost in the minds of the people, and by being a strong supporter of that philosophy, I believe the people rejected it.
That was Governor Wendell Ford of Kentucky, who will be coming to Washington as a senator in January, and his place in Frankfort will be taken by the present Lieutenant Governor, Julian Carroll. Mr. Carroll heads the other wing of the Democratic Party in Kentucky, but was very much in favor of Mr. Ford's election tonight because it means Mr. Carroll gets to move up a notch. Let's take a look at some other close races in the South. In the South Carolina gubernatorial race, the Republican State Senator Edwards is leading William Jennings Bryan Dorn with about 12% of the vote in. Edwards has a 54%, 46% margin. In the North Carolina Senate race, Robert Morgan, the Attorney General of the state, has been elected according to our CBS News estimate. With about 4% of the popular vote there, he's got 69% of the vote. In the Florida Senate race, still very close, with Dr. John Grady, the American Independent Party candidate, pulling between 16 and 19% of the vote. Richard Stone and Jack Eckert are in a very close race. The Democrat Stone has now moved slightly ahead. And in the Senate recap board, if we can take a look at the full spread of Southern senators, James Allen of Alabama, re-elected. Herman Talmadge of Georgia, re-elected. Wendell Ford of Kentucky, elected. Russell Long of Louisiana, re-elected. Robert Morgan of North Carolina, elected. And Ernest Hollings of South Carolina, re-elected. And in Texas, Walter, Governor Dolph Briscoe is an easy winner this evening, re-elected to his second term over Republican Jim Cranberry and the Raza Unida candidate Muniz. Walter?
David Dick is with George Wallace at the Governor House Motel in Montgomery, Alabama. Let's go there for David and Governor George Wallace.
Good evening, Governor and Mrs. Congratulations. It's almost as if there were no election at all. It was so easy. How do you account for that?
Well, of course, I think the matter was concluded in the primary where I won overwhelmingly. I did not campaign but very little in the general election, but we did win very handily here in Alabama.
You've almost lost your voice.
Yes, I got very hoarse this afternoon in the air down in my little town of Clayton, Alabama. You know, the temperature dropped a little bit to 70 degrees. It got a little cool.
Governor Wallace, looking ahead to the future, do you plan to be at the mini convention in Kansas City?
I'm considering going to the mini convention in Kansas City. I haven't definitely made up my mind, but the chances are I will be there.
We can safely speculate that you will be a candidate for the presidency in '76.
Well, you could safely do that, I suppose, because I'm very interested in 1976, although I hadn't made up my mind, but I do feel that the Democratic Party is going to have to really get back in the middle and offer some very strong alternatives to what we have seen in the last several years that has brought us to the state of economic recession that we're now in.
I got a very strong impression talking with you this afternoon on our way to Clayton and back to Montgomery that there's a good possibility that you will run independently of the major party.
No, I don't know that I would do that at all. I don't rule anything out. But the Democratic Party got a very good message in 1972, not only from the primaries that I ran in and won, but also from the electorate in the general election of 1972. And if the Democratic Party does not heed that warning and give the people an opportunity to have them relate to it, then of course I'm sure they're going to have some way to relate to a general election in 1976. I am hopeful and prayerful that the Democratic Party will heed the lessons that they should have heeded and learned in 1972.
Have you definitely made up your mind about whether you'll run in the primaries?
No, I haven't definitely made up my mind in that regard, but I'm in good health and I'm going to be active and involved.
You could run in the primaries? You feel well enough?
Oh, I feel well enough, yes, but I'm not decided on that at all.
It is conceivable that you might not run in the primaries?
Oh, it's conceivable, of course, that I might or might not, but I just haven't made up my mind at the moment.
Mrs. Wallace, there are reports that you may be running for governor yourself 4 years from now. Is that true?
I don't have a microphone.
Excuse me, let me give you a microphone.
I've heard those reports too, and I think it's just speculation because Governor Wallace's first wife was governor. It's natural that people would expect that that might happen again, but there's been no discussion between us about it, and we do not have any plans like that at all.
Thank you very much, and congratulations again, Governor.
Congratulations. We have a report on another of those members of the House Judiciary Committee who had to vote on the impeachment of President Nixon, and who were seen on national television, of course, during those difficult days of July and August. In South Carolina, Democrat James Mann has been re-elected, defeating Republican Robert Watkins in that race. Let's go to the western part of the United States now, where I don't suppose there are any returns in yet, but maybe Leslie Stahl has something to tell us from out there.
All I can tell you is we should be getting our first returns in within the hour. And let's talk about 3 states where we expect early returns: New Mexico, Wyoming, and Colorado, where in each state there is a close race for the governorship. In New Mexico, Democratic State Senator Jerry Apodaca is trying to beat Republican rancher Joseph Skeen. If Apodaca wins, he'll be the first governor of Spanish-American extraction in 56 years in New Mexico. In Colorado, the Republican incumbent John Vanderhoof faces a tough fight from the Democrat and environmentalist Richard Lamb. He campaigned against rapid development of the state's resources and once said, and I quote him, "You know, there are more than 200,000 swimming pools in Los Angeles, and they're filled with Colorado water right now." Water is also a major issue in the Wyoming race for governor, where trucking company owner Dick Jones, a Republican, is in a tight race with the Democratic candidate lawyer Ed Hirschler. Walter?
In the Tennessee governorship race, the CBS News estimate is that that seat will be taken away from the Republicans, returned to Democratic hands, that Ray Blanton, the Democratic candidate there, will win with 55% of the vote over Lamar Alexander. And the actual tabulated vote so far from Tennessee shows Blanton leading with just about that percentage, 56 to 44, with just over 10% of the vote counted. Tonight in California, the man whose presence as President of the United States meant so much to this campaign through the Watergate scandals is said to be not watching the returns on television. Richard Nixon is not feeling well enough, we're told by his aides at the Long Beach Hospital, but he did vote yesterday his absentee ballot, and Ron Ziegler, a spokesman for him, said that while they didn't discuss the matter, Mr. Nixon has been a lifelong Republican, so he can assume how he voted. We haven't heard today from Vice President Agnew, who also resigned in disgrace, and the two men who ran against them in 1972 are both, one is still in politics. George McGovern has a tight race in South Dakota to return to the Senate, and we'll be getting some returns on that in the next hour or so. Tom Eagleton, who briefly was his vice presidential candidate, is running in Missouri. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters.
This is CBS. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, this is Election 74. Here again is CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
And hello again from our CBS News Election Headquarters. CBS News Estimate can say now that in the gubernatorial race in Connecticut, Ella Grasso has won, the Democratic candidate becoming the first woman governor of that state. She has defeated the young Republican, Robert Steele, by 60 to 40%, according to our CBS News estimate. The actual tabulated vote from Connecticut, with 10% of the vote in, shows there was just about that sort of a lead, 62 to 38%. In Missouri, in the senatorial race there, the incumbent Democrat wanting to go to Congress for the second term, Thomas Eagleton, has won with an estimated 62 to 38%, according to our CBS News estimate. The tabulated vote in Missouri shows these results with just 5% in. Eagleton with just about that same kind of a percentage already, 64 to 36%. Also in the Pennsylvania gubernatorial race, our CBS News estimate has the incumbent Democratic Governor Milton Schaap winning re-election there over Andrew Lewis, the Republican, 53 to 47%. The tabulated vote from that Pennsylvania gubernatorial race, 4% of the vote in, Schaap 55 to Lewis's 45%. Also, the governorship in Oklahoma has been won by the Democrat David Boren, in Maryland by the incumbent Governor Marvin Mandel, and those two races are in our total tabulation now that looks something like this. In the Senate, 11 of the 34 races, almost a third of them, have been decided, and the Democrats have won all 11 of those. 23 races still yet to be heard from tonight. That means the Democrats have gained one seat, because in Kentucky, Wendell Ford, the governor, defeated the incumbent Republican Marlo Cook. In the gubernatorial races, the Democrats have won all 10 of the races that we have been able to decide so far this evening. That leaves 25 yet to be decided, and the Democrats have picked up 2 state houses so far, in Tennessee and in Connecticut. In the House races, there are only some 98 of them decided out of the 435 so far, 22 Republicans and 76 Democrats, and of those, 59 Democrats were unopposed, as was 1 Republican. And now in Vermont, there's a call in the gubernatorial race there, but Mike Wallace can tell us about that as he runs down all of the eastern region races. Mike?
Well, Walter, Governor Thomas Salmon has been reelected in Vermont over Republican Walter Kennedy. 15% of the vote has been counted so far in Vermont, and as you can see, it's a very small amount. Thomas Salmon running against Walter Peanut Kennedy. Salmon is only the second Democrat in Vermont's history, I guess, that who has been governor of that state. He has tried to keep Vermont a secret. He doesn't want people moving in. Let's go to some of the other gubernatorial races, though, that you announced. First of all, let's go to Pennsylvania, where Milton Schaap has been apparently reelected, according to the CBS News estimate. With 4% of the vote counting, you can see that Schaap is well ahead, and CBS News estimates that when it is all put together, Schaap will take 53% of that vote over Andrew Lewis's 47%. Schaap is the first Jewish governor in Pennsylvania history, the first who by law is permitted to succeed himself. Running for his second term, he was thought to be a sure shot. Then there were some scandals in Harrisburg, but obviously Pennsylvania's voters were not impressed by that particularly. In Connecticut, Ella Grasso. She will be the next governor of Connecticut, first in its history, first woman elected governor in the United States who did not inherit that job from her husband. She is 55, a mother, a politician who hasn't lost a race in 20 years. She is not a women's liber. Strident voices turn me off, she says. She is against abortion. She got only a 60% rating from the women's lobby in Washington. That does not mean that she is anti-feminist, but she saw some polls early on in Connecticut which showed that the Italian Catholic male was a little bit leery of women running the money affairs of the state of Connecticut. And the Italian Catholic male is a big part of the voting population in the state of Connecticut. Therefore, she downplayed the women's lib item. Incidentally, Abe Ribicoff has been returned to the Senate by a huge margin in the state of Connecticut. According to the CBS News estimate, when all those votes are in, Abe Ribicoff will wind up with 64% of the vote. His opponent, James Buddy Brannan, a black airline pilot. Nobody else wanted to run against Abe. This is the first time that a black has been nominated by either party in Connecticut for a statewide post. Brannan is a state legislator just ending his first term. Abe Ribicoff, 36 years in public life, 12 years in the Senate, returned to office. And finally, we come to the governor's race in Maryland, where Marvin Mandel has won by a considerable margin over his Republican challenger, a woman, 49 years old, amiable, sociable, wealthy, Louise Gore. She is a maiden lady. With 5% of the vote in the state of Maryland, you can see that Marvin Mandel is running ahead 17,000 to 14,000. When all the votes are counted in that state, however, it begins to look as though Marvin Mandel will have 54% of the vote over Louise Gore's 46%. That race, incidentally, Walter, turned a little mean. Marvin Mandel suggested that he thought that there was a double standard going on there. He just didn't know how to campaign against a woman. And it was a ladylike or gentlemanly campaign until about 3-4 weeks ago. They held a joint news conference, which turned into a shouting match. Governor Mandel was less than gentlemanly with Louise Gore. She said, "I am not going to appear in public with that fella anymore." Then he pointed out that she was quoted as saying that her daddy picked up her personal expenses. She said, "Well, talk about family. How about that fella? Well, you know all about him." And of course, Marvin Mandel had been divorced while he was in the State House. The campaign went downhill from there on. Marvin Mandel returned for another term in the State House in Annapolis.
On the other hand, the Connecticut race with Ella Grasso never got into that kind of thing at all. But Robert Steele did say, didn't he, one time, Mike, that he was having an awful time. He just didn't know how you struck out at a woman opponent.
That's correct. Some of his people put bumper stickers out that said, "Can Connecticut afford a governess?" And some others said, "Let's have a fella instead of Ella." But basically, he campaigned fair and square and lost big, as you can see.
By missing a chance, by a missing election, he's not going to be the youngest governor by any means either. David Boren of Oklahoma has been arrested, will be at 33, the youngest governor in the country. Now let's take another look at the South, and Roger Mudd's the man to do that for us. Roger?
Walter, David Boren, the young new governor, incoming governor in Oklahoma, as you reported, 33 years old. He's from Seminole, and until this last go-around, he was an obscure state legislator who moved into the gubernatorial primary, the Democratic primary. The party really was sodden with corruption out there, and Boren just clobbered the incumbent governor, David Hall, and Congressman Clem McSpadden, and he campaigned with a broom, and he walked along the Oklahoma highways, and tonight he is the victor over his Republican opponent, Jim Imhoff. The vote there, 64% to 36%. So the Oklahoma governorship stays Democratic. There's the CBS News estimate. In Tennessee, we have another pickup for the Democratic Party. That Tennessee governorship had been with Winfield Dunn for the last 4 years, and tonight Ray Blanton, former congressman who campaigned several years ago as a Wallace supporter, this time campaigning as a populist, is the new governor of Tennessee, and he defeated his Republican opponent, Lamar Alexander, who had come from the Howard Baker wing of the Republican Party. In South Carolina, there may be a chance for the Republican Party to pick up a seat. The Democratic Party left foundering by the disqualification of the popular Charles Ravenel, had to go to its second choice, Congressman Dorn. It took Dorn a couple weeks to get his campaign reassembled, and apparently he has not been able to catch up. The Republican, State Senator Edwards, a conservative from Charleston, is now leading Congressman Dorn. So let's take a look this evening at our gubernatorial recap board for the South, and you can get a quick look at what's happened at the state houses. Alabama re-elected George Wallace. In Arkansas, David Pryor, former congressman, is ahead, but not enough votes to report definitively there. In Florida, Reuben Askew re-elected. In Georgia, George Busby has defeated Machine Gun Ronnie, the mayor of Macon, whose campaign symbol was a machine gun because of his shoot-to-kill orders during some racial trouble there. Busby is the new governor of Georgia. In Oklahoma, as we reported, Boren the governor. In South Carolina, that's still too close to call. In Tennessee, a Democrat, Ray Blanton, taking that seat from the Republicans. And in Texas, that seat remains Democratic with Dolph Briscoe re-elected. Walter?
Speaking of the youngest governor, the oldest incumbent congressman running for re-election is in Dan Rather's district. That's Ray Madden in Indiana. He's 82 years old. The oldest non-incumbent running for Congress is Granville Thomas, 71 years old, and is running in Kentucky. He's running against a pretty formidable opponent, too, Carl Perkins, the chairman of the House Education and Labor Committee. Let's go to the Midwest, Dan. Give us a rundown of your interesting races out there.
For one thing, Walter, Kansas is getting very hot indeed, and I want to tell you about that. But first, let's recap what's happening overall with the Senate races in the Midwest. We have enough of the returns in to say definitely in Illinois, Adlai Stevenson III is an overwhelming winner. Adlai Stevenson III has now taken the place of his father as the largest vote-getter in Illinois history. He broke his father's record in sweeping to victory tonight, carried some parts of Chicago by 85% and better. Birch Bayh has won the Senate seat in Indiana. Thomas Eagleton, incumbent Democrat, held on to his seat in Missouri, and in Ohio, John Glenn is sweeping to victory there for his first term as a United States Senator. Now, let's take a look at Kansas and what's happening out there. We're beginning to get some returns from Kansas, and in what was expected to be an extremely close Senate race between the Republican incumbent, Bob Dole, one-time National Republican Committee chairman. With 4% of the vote in and tabulated, Dole has jumped out to a slight lead over Dr. Bill Roy, who is both a medical doctor and a lawyer, 53% to 47%. In terms of our CBS News estimate in Kansas, we do not yet have enough of our sample precincts in to even hazard a guess. We do know that Dole is winning in western and central parts of Kansas based on early sample returns. Roy is running very strong in the Kansas City area. Now, in the Kansas governor's race, this was not expected to be close. Vern Miller, the Democrat, was heavily favored, but the goateed lawyer and state senator Robert Bennett is out front on the basis of the returns that are in and tabulated. This would be an upset if Bennett holds on to win. Eric Clapton, the rock concert star, sings about "I Shot the Sheriff." Super Sheriff was the title of Miller, the nickname for Miller, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate who was favored out there. And if Bennett wins that race, you can bet he'll be going around singing, "I beat the sheriff." Now, I want to move quickly on to Ohio. The gubernatorial race there may again turn out to be a surprise on the basis of early returns. In and tabulated votes, Gilligan is leading Rhodes, but by not nearly the margin that was generally expected in that area. Rhodes' aide said the strategy was spend money on the tube and hide the candidate in the basement. And on the basis of these early returns, it looks like that strategy is paying off for James Rhodes, the Republican in Ohio, although Gilligan, the incumbent Democratic governor, does have the lead. In the Michigan gubernatorial race, that was the race Milliken, the incumbent Republican, one of the bright young hopes of the Republican Party, is trailing on the basis of these votes in and tabulated in Michigan, trailing Richard Levin, the Democratic challenger. This is a rematch of the race from the last time. In South Dakota, in the Senate race out there, not really enough of the vote in to tell very much. George McGovern, the Democratic incumbent, heavily favored in that race. We perhaps have more votes a little later on. The other story in the Midwest, Walter, is that in Indiana, most of the Republican congressional candidates are trailing in Indiana, and if that holds, I'll tell you what it could mean. It could mean that the Democrats' total in the House of Representatives, once all the returns are in, total number of House of Representatives could be 275, maybe even approach 300. Now, that's just a guess on my part, but I'm only saying that if this pattern that seems to be developing in the Indiana House races holds, that could be the kind of Democratic overall House victory that we'll be looking at, say, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Dan, in that 2nd congressional district out there, I've gathered all along that this is considered a real bellwether district as regards the effect of Watergate and the scandals on the various candidates. Because here's a clear-cut one. Earl Landgrebe, the Republican incumbent, stuck with President Nixon right to the end. And in fact, just before Nixon's resignation, the day before, he said, Landgrebe said, "Don't confuse me with the facts. I've got a closed mind. I will not vote for impeachment. I'm going to stick with my president, even if he and I have to be taken out of this building and shot." Well, apparently the electorate in the 2nd congressional district have taken him pretty much at his word, taken him out vote-wise, and done the job. It looks he has been defeated in the 2nd congressional district.
Well, Walter, that certainly would be one factor. It's also true that Landgrebe had a reputation in his district for saying rather outlandish things anyway, outlandish his opponents called them. And while certainly his sticking by Richard Nixon was a factor, it got down to a personality race as well. This is frequently the case in these tight congressional races, as you know.
And Dan, since we've been talking, that edge for Dole in Kansas over William Roy has narrowed a little bit, with 5% of the vote, and now it's 51 to 49%.
It's going to be close, but Kansas right now is the one bright spot in the Midwest for the Republicans.
We might say about that race also that William Roy, 48-year-old obstetrician, is also a lawyer. One of the 200 people in the country is both a lawyer and a doctor. And during the campaign, he was ceremoniously made an honorable Kickapoo Indian chief. So he's lawyer, doctor, Indian chief.
He's also the only candidate running this year, I think, who has a bona fide, documented, certified goatee.
In Arkansas, our CBS News estimate is that Dale Bumpers has won election to the United States Senate to replace the man he knocked out in the primaries, the longtime head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, William Fulbright. Dale Bumpers will go to Washington. He's won that race. Our CBS News estimate is that there's no question that he will win. And the actual vote total in Arkansas at this point, it looks like let's see, there's hardly, not even 1% of the vote in yet, so we have no totals at all. But we, by our means of taking sample precincts across the state, know that Dale Bumpers is the man. This gives 12 victories in the Senate so far for the Democrats and none for the Republicans. The Democrats have taken one seat away from the Democrats. That's in the state of Kentucky, where Wendell Ford is going to replace incumbent Republican Marlow Cook. In the gubernatorial races, the Democrats also have made a clean sweep so far of those elections determined. That's in 10 states, and they have taken 2 seats from the Republicans in Tennessee and in Connecticut. The voting so far across the country has been rather spotty. It has been greater than expected in quite a number of states, according to the reports we've had so far. Oregon, Kansas, Michigan, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Arkansas, Vermont, most of those down through the center part of the country. The votes seem to be higher than expected, although the weather wasn't any too good out there. In Connecticut, California, New York, it's supposed not to be quite as large, perhaps falling even below the fairly low 1970 figure for the last midterm election. We're hoping to get some sort of an estimate shortly of just what the national turnout would be, whether this has been a low for the last 6 or so midterm elections. We'd have to go quite far low, however, to meet those years in the 1920s when apathy really extended across the country in midterm elections, and the vote total was down in the 20s and 30s. The CBS News estimate now on the makeup of the new House of Representatives is beginning to give us some sort of a trend. With something like 298 Democrats and 137 Republicans, or 187 Republicans is what it looks like now, give or take 13 seats in either direction. Let's take a look at actually the number of elected in the House. There are 435. All of the House seats are up, as you know. They are every 2 years. And 31 Republicans and 109 Democrats have been elected. That leaves us with 295 yet to be decided. However, Our CBS News estimate, based again on sample precincts and projections across the country, indicates 137 Republicans in the new House of Representatives and 298 Democrats. If that actually holds, and that's give or take 13 seats, we could be wrong by that many, we think, but if it holds at that figure or above for the Democrats, in other words, if they give them another 13 or they hold just the 298, they've got that so-called veto-proof House of Representatives, a two-thirds majority, to be around 290 seats. So it looks like a Democratic sweep in the House of Representatives as of this moment. In the state of Arkansas, in the gubernatorial race, we now have an estimate from our CBS News vote profile analysis that David Pryor, the Democratic candidate, will indeed win in Arkansas with something like a 2-to-1 margin over Republican Ken Coon. It's 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and the polls in a lot of other states are closing about now. We'll be having a lot of returns coming in the next half hour, we expect, and we have one CBS News estimate right now from the state of Maryland that the Republican Senator Charles Mathias has been reelected there by about 58 to 42% over Democrat Barbara Mikulski. The actual tabulated vote in Maryland is not terribly substantial at this moment. Actually, it shows with 25% of the vote, Mathias 57% and Mikulski 43%. That is a quarter of the vote in. I guess that's substantial enough. We'll count it that way at any rate. And so that shows so far 13 Senate races decided. On a recapitulation here of the 34 races, 21 yet to go. 12 Democrats have been elected and 1 Republican. That would be Mathias. Among the 12 Democrats, 11 go back to Democratic seats, but 1 Republican seat has fallen to the Democrats. That is in Kentucky, so the Democrats have a net gain of 1 so far for the new Senate. In the gubernatorial races, 11 have been decided. 10 of those Democratic races, are all 11 of them Democratic races, excuse me. 2 of them are Republican state houses that passed to the Democrats in Tennessee and Connecticut. A net gain of 2 gubernatorial spots for the Democrats so far. In the House races, something like 160 races have been decided out of the 435. Democrats have been elected in 39, and Democrats in 121, Republicans in 39. And our estimate of the new House, based on our samplings across the nation, are that the Democrats will probably get their two-thirds majority in the House of Representatives for that so-called veto-proof number, 298 to 137 for the Republicans, give or take 12 seats or so. Let's, we now have a call in the state of North Dakota, where CBS News estimate, basis of our sample precincts, says that Senator Milton Young, Republican, has been reelected to another term, his 6th in the United States Senate. His opponents were Democrat William Guy and James Jungroth, an independent. It had been expected that this might be a seat that the Democrats would take from the Republicans. They failed to do so. Milton Young has again beaten off opposition in North Dakota to go back to the United States Senate. A clear victory for Republicans there. Let's get the details of how the Democrats have been putting their victories together so far from first Mike Wallace in the East.
Walter, let's take a look. There are 6 Senate races in the East, 6 of them. And you can see 2 of them have been decided. The only Republican so far elected, re-elected in the case of Charles Mathias to the Senate, in the state of Maryland. The others are still pretty close races. 9 gubernatorial races, let's take a look at those. 4 of them decided, and as you can see, they are all of them Democratic governors. There are several close races still going on in the East, however. In the state of Maine, an independent by the name of James Longley is defeating at this moment the Republican and the Democrat. He is leading in the state of Maine with 36% to 33 and 31 for his 2 opponents, and that is a big surprise. He bills himself as an anti-politician. In the state of New Hampshire, close races still going on, not just for the Senate between Lou Wyman and John Durkin, but also a close race going on for the governorship there between Meldrum Thompson, who is thought to be a shoo-in to win on his promise to, as you can see, with 58-42%, 22% of that of the precincts reporting in the state of New Hampshire, but still that race is regarded as a very close race in New Hampshire. And in the state of Vermont, Richard Mallory, who is running to replace George Aiken as the Republican senator from the state of Vermont, running a very close race with Patrick Leahy, a state's attorney from Burlington. And now we have word that in the state of Massachusetts, the Democrats are going to take over that state house. Michael Dukakis, age 41, Greek-American, tough, bright, young, some said arrogant. Dukakis, according to the CBS News estimate, is the man who will replace Francis Sargent in the State House in Boston. Francis Sargent had been governor of Massachusetts for 6 long years, long enough to get lots of his constituents angry at him. Add to that an unemployment rate 2 full points above the national average, and the Democrats have, as expected, picked up another governorship in the East. Walter?
And Mike, just see that in that 2nd congressional district there, son of the late Senator Thomas Dodd has been elected to the Congress, Christopher Dodd.
In Connecticut.
Connecticut, right. Let's go to the Midwest now, and the end races there from Dan Rather. Dan?
Walter, let's look them over in the Senate races. First of all, we have a number of decisions in the Senate races, not very many in the gubernatorial races in the Midwest. For example, in the Senate races, Stevenson has won in Illinois, Bayh has won in Indiana, Eagleton took the Missouri race, and John Glenn, the former astronaut, is the new senator from Ohio. Now, in the Kansas Senate race, where the returns are beginning to come in, it still looks like it's going to be very close. This is the vote that's in and tabulated. We do not have enough of our sample precincts in yet in Kansas to make any CBS News estimate of that race. In the Michigan gubernatorial race, another one that shapes up as very close indeed. This is the actual tabulated vote. Sander Levin, we called him Richard a moment ago. Sander Levin is running very strong in the Detroit area and in the suburbs. This one could go right down to the wire. The Ohio gubernatorial race, another one that shapes up as very tight indeed. Gilligan, the Democratic incumbent, was heavily favored, but Walter, he's having a lot of trouble with James Rhodes, the former Republican governor of Ohio.
And how do they look in the South? Roger Mudd?
Walter, the South has 9 Senate races up this time. All but 2 of them have been decided. You can take a look at our senatorial recap board and just see what's happened. Allen from Alabama, Bumpers, the new man from Arkansas, and he's off and flying with a lot of national ambitions. Florida, that's very close still. Georgia, Herman Talmadge will be back again. In Kentucky, a new man, Wendell Ford. In Louisiana, Russell Long again. In North Carolina, a new man, Robert Morgan. In Oklahoma, still close there. And in South Carolina, Ernest Hollings will be back again. The gubernatorial winners include George Wallace in Alabama, David Pryor, a former congressman who ended, I think, for all intents and purposes, Orville Faubus's political career last summer, is the new governor of Arkansas. Reuben Askew, reelected in Florida. That raises his presidential or vice presidential stock. George Busby, the new governor in Georgia. David Boren, 33-year-old legislator, the new governor in Oklahoma. South Carolina still too close. In Tennessee, a pickup for the Democratic Party. Ray Blanton is the new governor there. And in Texas, Dolph Briscoe reelected. Our close races include Florida Senate, where Richard Stone, the Democrat, leads slightly, but the third-party candidacy of Dr. John Grady is preventing Stone from picking up much more than 2 or 3 points on the Republican Jack Eckert. In Oklahoma, a close race between incumbent Republican Henry Bellman and Ed Edmondson, the Democrat. Senator Bellman, going for his 2nd term, is leading, but there's no definitive trend. And finally, in the South Carolina gubernatorial race, there the Republican State Senator James Edwards still leads over Congressman William Jennings Bryan Dorn.
Thank you, Roger. Leslie Stahl, I suppose you still don't have any returns from the West. I don't know what seems to be holding you up out there, except it's the clock, I suppose. But what do you have to tell us?
Well, Walter, there are 10 races for Senate and 10 races for governor in the West, and more than half of those races are considered close at this point. While it was raining in the east and snowing in parts of the Midwest, it was magnificent weather throughout the West Coast, and that means that turnout has been higher than expected in some of the smaller states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada, where there are close races and where, by the way, the environmental issue has been important. But in the West's largest states, California and Washington, voter turnout is running low, and that is especially true in Republican areas. But the Republicans can take heart because turnout has been high in parts of Arizona, at least in the parts where Senator Barry Goldwater is considered to be strong. We will, of course, be watching the House races in the West to see if that predicted Democratic landslide will materialize, and we'll be especially watching two seats where veteran Republicans are up. House Minority Leader John Rhodes of Arizona and Bob Wilson of San Diego, California. They're both being challenged by young women, and they both say that these are the toughest races they've had in years. Walter?
Speaking of women, a short time ago, the new governor of Connecticut, Ella Grasso, spoke to reporters outside her home in Windsor Locks, Connecticut.
There's no question in your mind that you prefer to be known as governor and not by any other title, such as governess.
The people have been calling me Ella for too long. I expect that's what they're going to keep calling me.
Mrs. Grasso, how do you expect this to affect your life from this point forward? What is your first reaction after the years that you've spent in the State House and in state service to now have the chief executive post?
Well, of course, I'm overwhelmed. I realize the magnitude of the challenge that is before us. I hope that I will be able to give the service that the people of our state deserve. You know, I've had a love affair with the people of Connecticut for a long time. And this chance to be of service to them, to be the leader of our state as the governor, is for me the greatest responsibility that anyone can have. And I shall fulfill my responsibilities with all of the strength and all of the spirit that I have.
In South Dakota, Governor Richard Knipe has won re-election, according to our CBS News estimate, to a third term. He has defeated by a margin of some 54 to 46% the Republican challenge from John Olson. And the tabulated vote in South Dakota, let's see what that looks like. 2% of the vote is in only, but the percentages are very much the same, 54 to 46%, with just some 5,000 or so votes actually counted so far. So with that return in, the Democrats have won 13 governorships so far, taking 3 away from the Republicans, and the Republicans have won none so far. And in New York, the polls have barely closed there, but our CBS sample precincts tell us that Democrat Hugh Carey has indeed been elected governor of New York, defeating the incumbent Republican Malcolm Wilson by a very wide margin. Exact margin we'll have an estimate of very shortly. The polls are barely closed in New York. That was one of the 2 big races in New York, the other the Senate race, in which Jacob Javits was being challenged by Ramsey Clark. The pre-election polls indicated that Jacob Javits would win that one, but we now know that in the gubernatorial race the Democrats have won, so the senatorial race will be watched even more closely. Our coverage of Election 74 will continue shortly.
This is Robbie. This is a portrait of Robbie, taken with Polaroid's SX70 land camera, and developing in minutes into a print so real it wants to speak to you. But the camera won't let you stop there. Robbie is a lot of things, and the camera seems to search them out effortlessly, leading you to new discoveries about Robbie and about yourself. A portrait of Robbie. You could have taken it, you and Polaroid's SX70.
Eric Severide's been watching the return this election night, of course, along with all the rest of us. He has some thoughts now, I believe, on the implications of all of this for 1976 and the presidential run.
Well, I think that's worth starting to think about, though it's a bit early tonight. But if we're trying to figure out here what the people of this country are saying, we've got to pay attention to what's developing here with the House of Representatives, because that vote for the House is the closest expression of the national will we have in the absence of a presidential race. Now, the CBS projection already on the House says about 298 Democrats will be sitting there next January. That alone would be a gain of 50. It might even go higher, but it's not above the average when the other party has held the White House for as long as 6 years, which is the case now. The average in that kind of situation is a gain of 49. So this would not be unusual, but it's terribly significant if statistical history of this century means very much, and I think it probably does, because any gain of that kind and a hold on the House of that size by previous history means that that party, in this case the Democrats, would take the presidency 2 years hence. The highest, of course, was back in '36 when the Democrats held about 333. The parties, of course, are changing, and we're going to be talking more about that as the evening goes on and more of the evidence comes in. Some is in. It seems pretty clear that among the Democrats, McGovernism is dead, though by no means all the McGovernites, including McGovern himself. But those McGovernites running have been moving more toward the center. Not a dead center. They hope a practical, operating, effective center, but not so far left. These Democratic governors in power, and we're going to have quite a few of them, ought to mean a more stable party, probably less acrimony, a little less out of hand as it was 2 years ago. If we've got a New Deal type coalition developing all over the country again, then we're going to have a very active Congress with a great deal of spending. And then we have to think about what's happening to Republicans, and we'll leave that for later. All right, back to you, Walter.
Eric, as you were beginning to talk about the makeup of the House of Representatives statistically, I opened my little record book here to some figures which might be interesting. This will be the 94th Congress, of course. Since the beginning of the two-party system, that I guess dates to 1854, there have been 60 Congresses. The Democrats have controlled the House 33 times, Republicans 27 times. The Democrats have controlled the Senate 27 times, and the Republicans 33 times, the exact reverse. In this century, 37 Congresses this century, the Democrats have controlled both houses 22 times, Republicans control both houses 13 times. And now CBS News estimate is that indeed in the state of Maine, the independent James Longley, as you were saying a moment ago, Mike, has won that race, which is quite a surprise. You want to give us the details?
Well, there aren't an awful lot of there aren't a lot of details in yet, but apparently he has won the Maine governor's race. CBS News estimate suggests that Longley will get perhaps half of the total vote in Maine against Democrat George Mitchell and Republican James Irwin. Now, let's talk a little bit. If as Maine goes, so goes the nation, there is a lesson here for us all. James Longley is a former Democrat. He is running as an independent on the Longley for Maine line. For 2 years, he was the chairman of the Maine Management and Cost Survey, which was a commission set up to investigate ways to make government cheaper and more efficient. He is an efficiency expert. He has never run for political office before, and he heads an insurance consulting firm in Lewiston, Maine. He's running against James Irwin, the Republican, who is running for the 3rd time for that office, 3 times and out, I guess. He was the state attorney general formerly, and against George Mitchell. George Mitchell was the Democratic state chairman, national committeeman for the state of Maine, very close friend of Ed Muskie. Mitchell, Irwin down, Longley for Maine up, Longley the governor of Maine, and there is, I'm sure, some kind of a lesson for us here as to what the people of this country are beginning to say to politicians.
There's one thing that James Irwin may be saying up there in Maine, and that's that this old adage about getting out the vote is terribly important. That's the whole name of the game, because Irwin, you know, the last time out, going against the then outgoing Governor Kenneth Curtis, lost by just 890 votes out of a total of 325,000 cast. So
the turnout in Maine, incidentally, is up almost 10% from 1970. About 2 weeks ago, Irwin said, nobody's paying any attention to us. This is the most apathetic state in the nation. Conceivably, nobody was paying any attention to
James
Irwin.
Irwin. Our coverage of Election 74 will continue shortly.
Inside this cup, there is something incredible. Incredibly rich-tasting Carnation Hot Cocoa Mix. Just open the single-serving packet Stir in the hot water, and you've got it. Incredibly rich cocoa. From the bottom of the cup to the foamy top. A delicious change from soft drinks. Incredibly rich cocoa. Carnation Hot Cocoa Mix.
Cats have keen senses, like sight, hearing, and especially taste. That's why cats prefer Little Friskies, with flavors made from real beef liver, real chicken byproducts, real seafood. Absolutely no artificial flavoring. A cat's keen taste can tell. Little Friskies is the best tasting high-protein dry cat dinner.
Jane Russell, tell us frankly, why do you wear the 18-hour bra?
You know, it's tough for us full-figured gals to find a bra that combines support and comfort. And the 18-hour bra does. You see, this special 18-hour fabric stretches everywhere your body moves. It supports firmly, comfortably. And truthfully, I love the way it looks.
The Playtex 18-hour bra means real support and real comfort.
It's just a terrific bra.
And in Wisconsin, Senator Gaylord Nelson has been reelected to the Senate, and Patrick Lucy has been reelected to the governorship. We'll get more details on that shortly from Dan Rather. Right now, let's go to Roger Mudd and some details on Wilbur Mills' race for the Congress down there.
Walter, there are 37 House seats held by Republicans up for election this time, 119 seats altogether. The most interesting, the most nationally publicized is that of Wilbur Mills, who got involved with a Washington stripper and was found, police said, intoxicated one night along the Tidal Basin in Washington. The whole incident caused him to go back to Arkansas and put on a campaign like he'd never run before because he's never been challenged. Well, tonight, some scattered returns are in. They don't indicate much, except it looks like Wilbur Mills is going to be reelected very easily over his Republican opponent, Mrs. Judy Petty. In the 7th District of Georgia, which is an interesting race because that's an open seat, and the Democratic candidate, Larry McDonald and Quincy Collins, appear to be splitting even. And in Virginia, Walter, if we can make one quick mention of that, the GOP apparently tonight is going to lose 2 seats. Out of the 7 it holds in the 10-seat delegation in Virginia, it appears they are losing in the 8th and in the 10th district, where Joel Broyhill, trying to be reelected for the 12th time, is trailing.
Yeah, it certainly looks like no question about a Democratic sweep in the House of Representatives, a real landslide. Our CBS News estimate is that the Democrats perhaps will have a 295 vote majority in the 94th Congress, give or take 11 votes or so, and that's over their 2/3 needed. Javits has won in New York, according to our CBS News estimate, for re-election as a senator from New York. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters.
This is CBS. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, this is Election 74. Here again is CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
And our CBS News estimate is that Gary Hart will win the Senate seat in Colorado, now held by Peter Dominick. That Gary Hart, former campaign manager in the presidential race from George McGovern's, has unseated the conservative Peter Dominick by 59% to 41%. In the actual tabulated vote, as you see, with 1% of the vote in, it's just about that kind of a margin, 60 to 40%. And in South Dakota, the man for whom Gary Hart worked so hard in '72 to no avail, Senator George McGovern, has proved that he is still popular in his home state. Although he didn't carry it in the presidential race, he has been reelected to a 3rd term. His margin, according to our CBS News estimate, 53% over that of the former prisoner of war Leo Thorsness, 53 to 47%. The tabulated vote from South Dakota with 4% in shows McGovern 54 to 46% for Thorsness. Also, Governor Wendell Anderson, the Democrat, have been reelected in Minnesota, and Governor Philip Noel, Democrat, reelected in Rhode Island. We'll get details of those stories a little bit later from our regional correspondents. So far, therefore, tonight 18 of the 34 Senate races have been decided. The Democrats have won 15 of them, and the Republicans have won 3. The Democrats have taken 2 seats in the Senate from the Republicans so far, in Kentucky and in Colorado. The Republicans have taken no seats from the Democrats, having won only seats they now hold in Maryland and North Dakota and in New York, where Jacob Javits won just before we left the air for your local stations a few minutes ago. So far there is a net gain of 2 seats for the Democrats in the Senate. In the state houses, in the governor races, 18 of the 35 races have been chosen so far, and in 17 of those, Democrats have won. In 1, a Republican has won. The Democrats have taken 3 seats from the Republicans. 3 state houses go to the Democrats for a net gain of 3. There's actually 4 seats. Let's clear that up just a moment. The Democrats have won 4 seats from the Republicans. That's in Tennessee, in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, and in New York, which I hadn't tabulated a moment ago. The Republicans, or rather an independent, has won 1 seat, James Longley in Maine. If we put that in the Republican column, he is a conservative, and he won in Maine. So far, the Democrats have had a net gain of 3 seats. Also now in the Senate, a call from our vote profile analysis, and our CBS News estimate is that Richard Schweiker has been reelected to his seat from Pennsylvania to the United States Senate. They're holding on to that seat for the Republicans, defeating the mayor of Pittsburgh, Pete Flaherty, by 47%. The tabulated vote from Pennsylvania so far, with 40% of the vote in, so Schweiker with a 54 to 46% lead. In the House of Representatives, the real dimensions of the Democratic sweep this year so far can be seen. If the 435 seats up, the Democrats have won 154, the Republicans 56, 225 yet to be decided. Just about half of the seats have been decided so far. But our CBS News estimate, and look at this figure, the Democrats, we think, in the new Congress will have 297 seats. That's a huge gain over their present 248 majority. The Republicans would have 138, a loss of some 49 seats from their 187 they hold now, and that estimate is based on a give or take 11 figure. Also now in the state of Iowa, CBS News estimate in that Senate race says that John Culver will defeat Republican David Stanley when all the votes are in by 53 to 47%. The actual tabulated vote in Iowa, with 5% of the vote counted, shows Stanley leading 51 to 49%. But we, on the basis of the sample precincts from across the entire state, say that when the entire vote is in, that result will be reversed, and John Culver will pick up that seat that Harold Hughes is retiring from, and hold it for the Democrats. Now let's take a look across the country very quickly at where these victories have come and these losses. First from the East, Mike Wallace.
Walter, in the East, 9 governor's races. Let's take a look at them on our governor's board. As you can see, all but 2 have been decided, New Hampshire and Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, that Philip Noel has been reelected in the state of Rhode Island with 82% of the vote there, according to the CBS News estimate. So the only governorship that is still outstanding, that's correct, 79 to 21, for Rhode Island, Philip Noel, reelected to his 2nd term. Let's come back to that board for just a second. If we can take a look at that governor's board for just a moment, the only one that has not been decided yet is in New Hampshire, and that is the race between Meldrum Thompson and Richard Leonard, the one which Thompson, which was supposed to win very, very easily, and apparently has not yet won. There are 6 Senate races in the East, and let's take a look at how that has gone. 3 decided so far. Now, In New Hampshire, that was supposed to be taken by a Republican. Pennsylvania, as Walter has just announced, has been taken by Republican Richard Schweiker, back in the Senate for his second term. And in Vermont, Richard Mallory is supposed to win that one, but that race right now, with 47% of the vote in, shows Mallory and Patrick Leahy, his Democratic challenger, both of these men running for the possibility of replacing George Aiken in the Senate, Aiken having retired. 50-50 in that state. As we suggested at the beginning of the evening, Walter, it looks pretty close to a Democratic sweep in the eastern United States.
Dan Rather, how about the Middle West?
In the Middle West, Walter, first in the Senate races in the Middle West. And by the way, we have, out of 17 Senate and gubernatorial races in this section of the country, we have 12 of those races decided, and in all 12 cases, the party that had the office has held on to the office. So both Senate and gubernatorial in the Midwest thus far, no significant changes in party in terms of offices held. Let's have a look at that Senate board, if we may. Only one Senate race really outstanding since the Iowa race. John Culver, we've already said on the basis of our CBS News estimate that Culver wins in Iowa. So the Dole-Roy race in Kansas is our only undecided race in terms of the Senate. Now, in the gubernatorial races, according to our CBS News estimates, we have, in addition to what you see on the board there, we have Robert Ray estimated to be the winner in Iowa. Anderson wins in Minnesota. Lucy in Wisconsin, and those are the gubernatorial winners thus far. One other important race we should mention in the Midwest, Walter. Been a lot of interest in that Michigan Congressional District number 5. That was President Gerald Ford's old district, and with 24% of the vote in, the Democrat who won the special election earlier in the year is clinging to a lead. This is with 29% of the vote in. The Democrat is still leading in President Ford's old district. Walter, I still think that the major story, at least in the Midwest part of the country tonight, is the apparent overwhelming win of the Democrats in the House of Representatives.
How about the South? Roger Mudd?
That's the same thing in the South, Walter, just what Dan said. Indications are that the Republicans are going to lose a couple seats, drop 3 or 4 perhaps of the 37 House seats they hold. Just to look quickly, though, at the victories and the losses in the Senate in the South. They're the Senate winners. There are only 2 Senate races undecided this evening so far. The Florida race between Eckert, Stone, and Grady, and the Oklahoma race between Bellman and Edmonston. And in the gubernatorial election board, only 1 race still outstanding, and that's the South Carolina race between Edwards and Dorn. The most interesting and perhaps startling race this evening was that Joel Broyhill, who is the South's senior Republican in the House of Representatives, tonight conceded his defeat. He has lost to Joe Fisher. This would have been Mr. Broyhill's 12th term in the House of Representatives, but he's out now and he's lost by about 6 or 7%.
And Roger, I see that we've got a report on the 6th Congressional District of Virginia, where Caldwell Butler won re-election, which was another one of those Watergate test cases, since Caldwell Butler was the only Republican and Southerner to come out for impeachment even before the vote of the House Judiciary Committee in which he sat.
He never was really in any trouble, but it is an interesting measure of how his district regarded his performance. I think he prepared them well for what he was going to do.
Our CBS News estimate in the gubernatorial race in Nebraska is that the Democratic incumbent J.J. Exon has won re-election by a whopping 3-to-1 margin over the Republican Richard Marvell. And so this is the way it looks across the country now. In the Senate races, 30 of the 34 have been decided. The Democrats have won 16, the Republicans 4. That gives the Democrats a gain of 2 seats in Kentucky and in Colorado over the Republicans, a net gain of 2 since the Republicans have won none from Democrats. In the gubernatorial races, and I kind of balled this one up a moment ago, let's straighten it out now. The independent victory of James Longley in Maine, threw our calculations off a little bit, or mine at any rate. 18 Democrats have been elected so far and 1 Republican. The 18 Democrats include 14 seats that were held by Democrats and 4 that they take from the Republicans in Tennessee, in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, and in New York. The Republicans have won in Kansas, and the independent James Longley has won in Maine, taking away a Democratic seat there. So the gains. The Democrats have won 4 from the Republicans, but they lost that 1 to the independent in Maine, so their net gain is 3 in the state houses so far. In the House of Representatives, that's where the landslide nature of the Democratic victory on this election day 74 shows up. And now our CBS News estimate, well, let's look first at the actual figures. 168 Democrats elected, 63 Republicans. We still have 204 House seats to decide, so we've gone past the halfway mark. But our CBS News estimate, and look at this, that the Democrats will win 299 seats, give or take 11. That's a whopping increase from their 248 they hold now. And as a matter of fact, it is a 51 vote increase. 51 seats that they may well win from the Republicans. The Republicans look like they'll have only 136 in the new House of Representatives to the 187 they held this time. Now that's give or take 11 seats that still could go the other way. If all 11 seats turned out to be Republican seats, then the Democrats wouldn't have such a whopping majority, of course, and it wouldn't be the 2/3 that it looks like they have now. A 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives is considered, of course, a veto-proof majority, but that statement doesn't really hold up under close examination. It would be veto-proof if there were such homogeneity that the entire Democratic membership of the House could get together and vote solidly on any given issue. But being a group of individuals, and particularly those that are split between liberals and conservatives as they are, it hardly seems to be veto-proof. But it does look like a Democratic landslide at this time. Let's go over to John Hart now on our trend desk. He's been looking for some trends on how this new Congress may shape up on major economic and social issues. John?
Walter, based on the CBS News estimate of 299 Democrats in the new House and on surveys of all the candidates before this election, let's look at what the 94th Congress is disposed to do on 3 issues: wage and price controls, where to cut the budget, and national health insurance. Now, in the old House, only 189 members were in favor of giving the president power to control wages and prices. That was 43%. Now we estimate that the new Congress will have 212 people favoring controls, or 49% of the new House. Now, that's not quite enough to enact control authority, and certainly not enough to override a veto. On cutting the budget, 142 members of the old House, or 33%, wanted to cut the defense budget more than domestic spending. In the new House, we estimate about 188 want defense cut, or only 43%, not a majority. On health insurance paid for by Social Security taxes, in the old House, 197 were for it, or 45%, and in our new House, the estimate is some 222 congressmen, or just a bare majority of 51%, enough to pass, but not enough to override a veto on national health insurance. Now, this does not take into account lobbying, log rolling, or other forms of persuasion, but if our House estimate holds, and if these new members vote the preference they stated before the election, a slim majority does not want wage and price controls, does not want the defense budget cut instead of other spending, but does, by a slim majority, want health insurance paid for by Social Security. Now, of course, that's subject to a margin of error of 3%. But if the estimate holds, this is the largest opposition any president has faced in the Congress in this century. The trend is liberal, but on these issues, not irresistibly so, and certainly not veto-proof. Walter.
Thank you, John. The turnout tonight apparently is considerably less than had been indicated in early reports from many states. Across the country, there were early reports that the turnout was heavier than had been anticipated. Of course, it had been anticipated that it would be very low, that apathy had taken over the American public. If not apathy, then a silent vote of protest by no vote at all. Well, now our CBS News estimate of the national vote turnout shows that it may very well indeed be at a new low for the last 20 years or so. despite reports of that moderate to heavy turnout earlier. The CBS News estimate is that 55 million voters turned out, and that would be just 38% of the eligible voting age population. That compares with 47% in 1970, or 58 million. That was before the 18-year-olds had the vote, and with some 78 million, or 55%, in 1972, which was the last presidential year. The only thing that we can say about that is that it's still an improvement over the 1920s, when only 25 or 30% of the population turned out, but it does seem to confirm President Ford's fears that a minority of the American people would have elected the 94th Congress.